The car ride was quiet. Aaron kept his eyes on the road, his fingers tapping the steering wheel like he was late for something more important. I didn't ask where we were going. I already knew. The sign out front said, Willow Glen Transitional Care. But the look on his face told me this wasn't going to be temporary. He helped me out of the car like I was made of glass, then walked 3 paces ahead as if escorting a delivery. At the front desk, he smiled signed papers with practiced speed and said all the right things. Just for a little while, until she's steady on her feet again. I nodded, playing my part. I didn't want to make a scene not in front of the nurse with the clipboard or the elderly woman in the wheelchair watching from across the hall. My room had a recliner, a low twin bed, and a TV mounted in the corner playing a soap opera on mute. Aaron placed my overnight bag on the chair and adjusted the blinds like he was making himself feel better. I thanked him. He didn't meet my eyes. Dinner came early, lukewarm soup and something they called meatloaf. I barely touched it. At dusk, he reappeared. No flowers, no books, just a forced smile. I'll check on the house while you're here, he said, glancing around. We might even fix that porch step. You'll like it here, Mom. It's peaceful. That's when I asked how long he thought I'd need to stay. He hesitated. Just for a second. You're staying here now, he said quietly. It's for the best. And then he left. No hug, no promise to visit. Just the echo of the door clicking shut behind him. I stood by the window until the parking lot emptied. My name was still on the chart outside the room. But everything else already felt borrowed. I sat on the edge of the bed, my palms flat on the blanket, and waited for the part where someone came back. The morning light came through a narrow window near the ceiling. It wasn't much, but I sat in its path anyway, soaking up what I could. The view outside was of a gravel path and a chain-link fence lined with hedges that someone had tried to shape into hearts. They'd overgrown, like no one had checked on them in months. A nurse named Tanya brought in a plastic tray and set it on the bedside table. She was kind enough, called me Miss Lorraine, and asked how I'd slept, though her eyes flicked constantly to the hallway, like she didn't have time to hear the answer. While she checked my vitals, she mentioned that Aaron had signed the long-term placement form. She said it gently, as if it were good news. I blinked at her. No, I'm just here for a few days. Rehab, not residence. She hesitated. That's what we were told at intake, but the paperwork your son submitted indicates something more permanent. For discharge, we'd need family authorization. It's just policy. Policy. That word again. It's always used to excuse the part that hurts. I asked to use the facility phone. Tanya nodded and wheeled over a beige cordless that smelled like antiseptic. I dialed Aaron, straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Nothing. By lunchtime, I called Emily. She didn't answer either, but a few minutes later, a text buzzed through in Boston for a conference. Let's talk next week. I stared at the screen. Not a word about where I was. No questions. Just postponement. They had stopped checking in, stopped looking me in the eye long before this place. I just hadn't noticed. I set the phone back in its cradle and walked slowly toward the window. Someone had left a jigsaw puzzle half finished on the shelf. I ran my hand over the pieces but didn't sit. The sun moved across the wall and I stood still to catch every last bit of it. I hadn't realized how small the sky could feel when it was rationed. Tanya let me use the computer in the activity room after lunch. It was an old laptop with sticky keys and a browser that barely loaded, but it was enough. I told her I wanted to look at the local news. That part was true. Instead, I typed in the county assessor's website. My fingers moved slower than usual, hesitating over every letter of my address. The page loaded. I blinked twice to be sure. Owner Aaron Hensley. Transfer date. 2 weeks ago. I read it again, then again, hoping it would change. It didn't. My heart pounded in my ears. I felt the tremble in my fingertips before I saw it in the way they hovered above the keyboard. I remembered the day Aaron came by with a stack of papers, said the insurance company wanted a temporary caregiving agreement after my fall. I'd been groggy from the hospital medication, sore and tired. He told me not to worry, just sign, so he could handle things while I recovered. It hadn't felt like a trap. Not then. The words power of attorney were on one of the documents. I remember asking what it meant. He said it was just in case, and I believed him. I clicked print record and waited as the machine hummed and sputtered. 1 page. His name at the top, mine gone. I folded it carefully, tucked it under my sweater, and wheeled back to my room. Once inside, I slipped the printout into a large print copy of The Secret Garden someone had left behind on the shelf. I slid the book behind 2 others on the bottom row of the bookcase. If he had taken the house, what else had he touched? I stared at the blank notepad on the table and started a list. Not of things to do, but of things I'd already lost. 1 name, 1 signature, 1 house. Tomorrow, I would ask for a phone call again, but not to Aaron, not this time. I told Tanya my stomach hurt. She offered ginger tea and said she'd mark me absent from the group bingo hour. I thanked her and waited until the hallway was quiet before pulling the small phone from the drawer near the nurse's station. It wasn't supposed to be used without supervision, but no one was watching. I dialed Lydia's number from memory. We'd lived next door to each other for almost 20 years, sharing fences, grocery lists, and Sunday mornings. Her voice came through the line like it hadn't aged a day. Lorraine, where are you? Emily said you were at a spa recovery place. A spa, I said, almost laughing. It's a nursing home, Lydia. And I think my son took the house. There was a pause long enough for both of us to understand it wasn't a misunderstanding. I'm coming tomorrow, she said simply. True to her word, Lydia arrived in the early afternoon. She wore a cardigan and carried a clipboard to look official. The staff assumed she was a social worker and waved her through without question. When we reached the parking lot, she opened her car door and started the engine so the heater would muffle our voices. I unfolded the paper and handed it to her. Aaron's name stared up at us, bold and final. She traced it with her finger, then looked at me. You need a lawyer, she said. A real one. I know someone who helped my cousin when her husband forged a mortgage. Quiet, but sharp. We'll start there. I nodded, the relief sharp enough to sting. They monitor calls and mail here. Then we'll send puzzles, she said. Crosswords, Sudoku. Whatever looks innocent. You write what you need inside the clues. We sat for a moment, the heater blowing warm air between us, both of us, knowing this was only the beginning. Before she left, she reached across the console and squeezed my hand. You've still got fight in you, Lorraine. They just don't remember it. That night, I took the crossword book she'd left and circled the first word I wanted her to see, lawyer. The envelope came folded inside a book of classic crosswords, Volume 7, the one with a broken spine. Lydia had underlined the clue for loophole in red ink. I opened the book slowly, careful not to crinkle the pages, and found the manila envelope tucked between pages 42 and 43. It was heavier than I expected. Inside a typed letter, several legal forms, a return envelope, and a handwritten note from Lydia. Lorraine, the firm is called Klein and Holt. Don't worry, I trust them, and you will too. Read everything. Sign nothing until you're sure. L, the cover letter from the attorney, was direct. My power of attorney had been activated improperly, using a durable clause tied to medical capacity. But the paperwork lacked one thing, the required physician's letter stating I was mentally unfit. There was none. Even better, the original deed had never been fully revoked. Years ago, when Aaron asked to streamline things, I'd signed a secondary copy, but the witness page was left blank. Without that page, the deed sat in legal limbo. The lawyer's instructions were clear. I needed to revoke the POA, reassert my ownership through a trust, and move the house into it before Aaron could sell or borrow against it. The window was small, but it was open. Each form had careful tabs: where to initial, where to sign, where to date. I worked on them at night while the halls were quiet and no one came to check on me. My jigsaw puzzle half finished. Fruit baskets became the hiding place. I slipped the signed pages beneath the tray, wrapped in a paper towel so they wouldn't bend. By Friday, it was all done. I sealed the return envelope with both hands pressed down hard, like I was sending a message heavier than paper. The next morning, I handed the crossword book back to Lydia during her visit. She smiled, flipped through it casually, and tucked it under her arm. I walked her to the front door without being stopped. That small taste of freedom stayed with me the rest of the day. Tanya knocked gently before entering my room. "Your son is stopping by this afternoon," she said, as if that were a good thing. I nodded and thanked her, keeping my face still. I spent the next hour in the library, pretending to browse. Lydia had arranged a delivery. On the shelf, tucked behind a copy of Great Expectations, was a worn hardcover of The Grapes of Wrath. Inside the hollowed pages, wrapped in a napkin, was a small black recorder, no bigger than a flash drive. I slipped it into my sleeve, pressed the switch, and let it hum silently in my pocket. Aaron arrived right on time. Khakis sweater watch I didn't recognize. He brought a bag of mints and some lotion, as if I were a guest and not someone he'd locked away. We chatted at first. Weather facility meals, a neighbor who'd asked about me. Then his tone shifted. "I know you're restless," he said, "but this is the safest place for you now. Emily and I talked about it. We've renovated the house anyway. Opened up the kitchen, repainted everything. It wouldn't feel like home anymore." I looked at him, careful not to interrupt. He kept going. "We're thinking of using it for short-term rentals. It's a good area, and we need the income. The deed's already changed and you signed the forms, don't you remember?" I kept my voice calm. "What forms?" He hesitated. "The ones you signed after the hospital? The caregiving stuff?" "I filled in some things later. It's not a big deal. It's done now." He smiled like it was a favor. Like I should be grateful. We sat in silence for a while after that. He tapped his fingers against the chair arm, glanced at his phone, then stood. "I'll stop by again next week." I walked him out my hand, never leaving the recorder in my pocket. When he turned the corner, I went back to my room and placed it beneath the puzzle box next to the signed forms, sealed and waiting. By evening, Lydia had the device in her hands. Lydia handed off the recorder the same night. By morning, I had a call waiting from the lawyer's office. Tanya let me take it in the conference room, a beige box of a space with bad acoustics and a window that didn't open. "Mrs. Hensley," the voice on the other end said, "we've reviewed the recording. That alone is enough to establish coercion and unauthorized use of power of attorney." I said nothing for a beat. I just let that sentence sit there. "We're proceeding with the trust transfer. Is that still your wish?" "Yes," I said. "Move everything." Years ago, before Aaron's business even had a name, I'd started a limited liability company for tax planning. It held nothing but a shell bank account and some placeholder documents. I'd almost forgotten about it until I went looking for something Aaron couldn't touch. Now that dormant LLC would become the trust's holding entity. The house, the small retirement fund, the savings bonds my late husband left in the kitchen drawer, they'd all go there. The law firm drew up the final paperwork that afternoon. By the next day, a formal injunction had been filed with the county to halt any sale, remodel, or transfer tied to the property. A notice was posted at the house. Aaron wouldn't see it coming until he tried to do something with the title. I signed the last piece quietly, a full transfer of control for all my liquid accounts into the trust. Every dollar now sat behind legal walls. Aaron couldn't access anything, not without my fingerprint and 2 signatures. The next envelope Lydia delivered was slimmer. A copy of the trust document stamped and finalized. I sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through the pages slowly. It felt like locking a vault. Not to hoard anything, but to make sure the damage stopped here. The puzzle pieces on the table remained untouched. I moved one absent-mindedly, then pushed the whole box aside. The nurse knocked later that evening. "You have a visitor tomorrow. Court liaison." He arrived just after breakfast. Tall gray suit, no name tag. Just a man with a calm voice who asked to speak with the facility director, and then with me. I was taken to a small office where the director waited with folded hands and a tight expression. Papers were already laid out across the desk. "There's been a review," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Your son's documents were not only incomplete, but misleading. The court has voided the power of attorney effective immediately. You are no longer under care order." Her voice softened like she remembered I was still a person. "You're free to leave, Mrs. Hensley." "We're very sorry." I gave a small nod. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. They offered to call a taxi. I declined. Lydia was already waiting in the parking lot. She stepped out of the car the moment she saw me, her hands already reaching for my bag. "You look like hell," she said gently. "Let's get out of here." We didn't talk much during the drive. Just let the road stretch out in front of us while the sky opened into a soft, pale afternoon. As we turned down my old street, I saw it, my former home now stripped of its welcome mat and flower boxes. A taped notice flapped against the front door. Legal lettering sealed in plastic. The contractors were gone. The debris pile from the so-called renovation had been cleared. But the house looked smaller than I remembered. Hollow, even. I didn't ask Lydia to stop. I just stared as we passed, letting the final image settle where memory used to be. When we reached the next turn, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a key. Not to the old house, but to the cottage we'd spoken about. The one in my name. The one no one else could touch. I curled my fingers around the metal and held it like something alive. We turned off the main road heading west. The cottage sat at the edge of a quiet lane tucked between a post office and a little bookstore that still sold newspapers out front. It had a screened porch, 2 bedrooms, and floors that creaked in the right places. I didn't tell anyone the address. The deed was in my name alone, filed under the trust, sealed and final. No co-signers. No shared access. The sale of the old house had gone through days earlier. My attorney handled everything. Aaron received the notification by certified mail, a formal letter explaining that the trust had liquidated the asset and redirected the proceeds into a protected fund. The next morning, Emily called. Her voice cracked before she said hello. "You sold the house," she asked, more hurt than angry. "You didn't even tell us." I let the pause stretch. "You never asked," I said. "You just decided what was best for me. So I made my own decision." She started to say something else, but I told her I was safe and comfortable and that I needed to rest. Then I hung up. I unpacked slowly over the next few days. The dishes weren't the ones from the old kitchen, but they stacked neatly in the cupboard just the same. My husband's photo sat on the new mantel. The couch was secondhand, but it was mine. Every bill was in my name. Every key was accounted for. There was no buzz at the front gate, no hallway inspections, no clipboard schedules. Just the sound of my own breath, my own steps across the floor, and the quiet hum of a home no one else claimed. Lydia brought over coffee and a folding chair the next morning. We sat on the porch and watched the sun come up behind the bookstore. "You look taller," she said, grinning. "I might be," I answered. Inside, I had a drawer marked Documents. It held everything that mattered now, clear, simple mine. That evening, I opened the window just to let in the air. The breeze felt like it belonged to me again. Spring arrived quietly this year. No announcements, no urgency, just the soft shift in light and the steady return of birdsong outside my window. I spent the early mornings in the small patch behind the cottage, kneeling by the raised beds. The soil still held chill from winter, but it gave under my hands without protest. I planted mint first, then thyme, pressing each root into place like I was tucking something in for the night. Most days I walk to the library just after 10. I help a few seniors navigate their online accounts, pensions, utilities, email. It's simple work, but it feels useful. There's comfort in passing on the knowledge they once called me too old to keep. Lydia comes by most weekends with pastries and too many opinions about crossword clues. We sit on the porch with chipped mugs and talk about everything but the past. Sometimes we play cards. Sometimes we just listen to the wind through the pines across the street. Inside the cottage, there's a fireproof box in the closet. I open it once a month just to check. Everything's there. The trust papers, the deed to the house, the documentation from the revocation hearing, and one small flash drive with the original audio file still saved. I've never pressed play again. I don't need to. Aaron hasn't called. Emily sent one more message months ago. I hope you're okay. I didn't respond. I'm not waiting for apologies. I'm not looking for explanations. Some mornings I sit on the porch long before sunrise just to feel the quiet settle around me. It no longer feels like absence. It feels like choice. I've left the power of attorney paperwork untouched, tucked away in a drawer marked unnecessary. Nothing about my life is big now, but every inch of it belongs to me. This morning, I trimmed the mint and started the kettle. The kitchen window stayed open while the breeze came through, uninvited but welcome. I didn't look back. I just let the leaves steep.